Hello.
Hello, how are you?
Fantastic. How are you?
Yeah, all good to go. Wrapping up the con. You're nearly there.
Nearly
Mm.
there. I hear you're talking to us about birds. That's the thing, right? It's all birds.
Yeah. Yeah, oh,
Yep.
no, it's all digital forensic. No mention of birds whatsoever. They all right.
Okay. Sounds boring. All right. Well, I will click this button and then we will let you speak.
Okay. You good to go? All right, yeah. So thank you very much for having me on. I'm going to be talking about forensic analysis of Windows prefetch files, or why they're like ducks. Sorry, that's the topic for today. What this is going to look like is I'll give a bit of an introduction, and then I'm going to be talking through kind of broadly how they're similar, and that means what they're built for, how they operate, and how you can mess with them. So firstly, who am I? So I have a long background in security as a whole, but I started shifting into cyber about 5 years ago, and in doing so, I completed a master's. And now that was initially about cybersecurity generally. But about halfway through, I really found that I absolutely love the digital forensic element of it and ended up specializing in that. So usual disclaimer, I'm speaking as an individual, but I'm also speaking as an individual who's done research into this area. So I'm talking more from the theory side of things. I'd love to hear, whether it's in the chat or in person, whenever, what people's experiences have been in an Australian context dealing with this real world. So that kind of brings me on to the purpose of this talk, which is, really it was a sort of self-challenge for me as my first ComfyCon talk, trying to merge two of my favorite things, so ducks and forensics. There we go, natural pair, those two. But ultimately, I'm trying to demystify demystify digital forensics as a whole, and in doing so, maybe provide a general overview to some of the types of evidence that we can potentially look at in investigation. But if you are experienced already in this topic and you're all over it, I have a challenge for you, which is see if you can work out the connection between these individuals and ducks. So here we go. Got a screenshot or something of that because I'm not coming back to it. Okay, let's go. All right, so digital forensics, starting at the very beginning. Digital forensics is a science, and that covers the removal, recovery, extraction, analysis, everything of electronic evidence. Effectively, you're trying to go over the available data and work out what the duck happened. So most of the applications we see are in law enforcement or criminal or civil proceedings, so court, but it's also used quite extensively in incident response. Again, trying to work out what happened either during or after an incident. And that's the DF and DFIR. So for anyone who's lost data, bugged up a phone, and is trying to recover information, that's already quite difficult sometimes in itself. But when you've got a malicious actor who's in a system or a network and is deliberately trying to muck things up, then often what they'll do is cover their tracks. And in doing so, they can complicate things in a few ways for investigators. And that, at the very obvious level, is through the use of deletion software, data wipers to erase any evidence that they were there or what they did to make response more difficult. And that can include erasing programs, files, and event logs. But that said, event logs may be difficult to get anyway, so they might not be sufficient in many organizations. Either they weren't set up or enabled, they haven't been set off to a SIM, so they're not easily recoverable, or they might just be rolling way too fast. So by the time an incident is actually being discovered or investigated, those event logs have already been overridden. So in many cases, investigators are having to find less obvious traces or artifacts of what happened. And there are other types of evidence as well that I won't be touching on here and buried in memory. But by themselves, they can't give you a full picture of what happens. So like shim cache, it can give you a clue as to what was executed, but by itself is not like the be all and end all. So again, we're going to need to do some digging and ultimately come up with some, like, go a bit sneakier in trying to find ways to determine what happened. So that's where we go into Prefetch. So these are sometimes called scenario files. So not scenario like Retrospect's amazing labs that, in the competition they just ran, but in the creation or opening of a program, the system actually creates these files. And you can see them in the location shown there as quite typical, and you're not able to get into them without administrator privileges usually. So when a program or executable is first run, these are created, and you can see there the name tends to reflect the name of the program, as well as a hash of where it was stored, sometimes a command with which it was used to, which opened it as well. And separate prefetch files can be created for the same program if it's being stored or opened from different locations. So again, you can see there, Discord, just on this computer even, is everywhere and has multiple prefetch files. So you can imagine from an incident response kind of perspective, this could be really useful. If you open this up on the system and you can see something obviously malicious or obviously suspicious, then you already have a starting point, even without having to break it down further. But, you know, that's that from the forensic perspective. The important thing, though, is how is this type of file like a duck? Quick launch, or quack launch, if you will. It is what they were built for. So the whole point of prefetch files was to enable or to improve with Windows performance and application performance by loading some of that application data into memory before the launch. So effectively, it sees you open a program, goes, all right, well, these are the artifacts of memory or data that you required to run that program last time. I'm going to make a note of that. So next time you go and use that program, I can open up quicker. Like, that's the whole point. So just like that, ducks themselves are designed to take off faster just by virtue of being ducks. They're on the water. Look how good they go. Take off much faster because they can run on water. So there we are. Aside from that, though, how can you tell a duck is a duck? You can easily identify a duck by its head. And just like that, you can easily identify a prefetch file by its header. So for those who aren't familiar, a file header or signature is the data or metadata that's at the start of a file and is used by the operating system to determine its file format. So you open up an image or any type of file, and your OS is going, oh, what program do I need to boot that up? It might also have other information about the type about the file. So for an MP3, it might have information about the song, or what metal speed operatic swing band it refers to, just for a random example. So prefetch files aren't human readable in themselves. You can't just open them up off your desktop. But if you were digging around and you wanted to have a look at the structure, we can break these down using a hex viewer or a tool like HexDump. Sorry, it's a bit fuzzy, but there's a screenshot of me looking into this a while ago using HexDump of a file called minor.pf meta, just using the C flag to make it a bit more readable. So the hex view and using the N flag to just make it the first 512 bytes, whatever you need just to see. So if you're looking at an executionable, it'd probably show up with MZ, but in this case we're seeing man, so we know that's prefetch. But just like there are different types of ducks, there are different types of signatures for prefetch as well, and these are all readily available. You can find a list of these on the internet. So obviously there are other ways to tell that a duck is a duck, but people are generally going to be thinking about the thing sticking out the front as in its bill. We'll talk about other things later. Okay, but when you get down to it, if you had to, they are reasonably easy to pluck if you have the right strategy and technique. So this applies for ducks, but it also applies to Windows Prefetch. So yeah, we have a couple of tools here, but there's a bunch of them. Windows Prefetch View is on the left there. That's pretty straightforward and easy to use. GUI, But the one, and we also have, I think it's FTK, Imager, and a few other forensics software suites include the ability to analyze Prefetch. But the tool I generally see used is PECMD by Eric Zimmerman, who's awesome. And that's pretty much just run out of the shell, which is great because you don't need to install a bunch of stuff. And that will let you break down Prefetch files individually, or you can output a whole directory and provide an analysis. It also does the ability to drop these out in a timeline view, so sorting them by date of execution or use. So yeah, again, helping you build out a sense of what had happened and how to identify traces of it. So yes, that brings us on to breadcrumbs. So effectively, that's what we're trying to do with Prefetch, is follow the breadcrumbs. And yes, I know bread is bad for ducks, but they still love to follow them. So we're going to follow them anyway. The types of breadcrumbs you get out of Prefetch, you can see there. So this is PECMD on the screen. I pulled this out this morning and is looking at Tor and is able to provide evidence of its execution, including the first, last run and the run count. So even without, depending what you're looking at, if you've got a malicious program, you can be like, all right, bang, yeah, that's what was used. But aside from that, though, it can also just be a good starting point for an investigation. Now, usual forensics caveat, we've got to be very careful with timestamps. These aren't necessarily easy to use. UTC, you've got to be careful of like time zones as well as daylight savings, not looking at anyone in particular, and time stomping, which is something I'll talk about later as well. But it gives you a starting point, and you can dig further into other parts of evidence available to you, like the master file table. What is of real interest, though, there, as you can see a little bit, is that it also shows the files and directories that were referenced. So again, this is Windows going, hey, these were the things that were drawn on by this program in its first 10 seconds. So it's been very helpful there, but it's also been helpful from a forensics point of view as well. And that, again, may give us some clues. There we go. So, I mean, to try and break this down, I'm hopefully making this understandable if you're coming into it fresh. I'm going to look at a couple of examples that are available on the web. This one's provided by Forensic Focus, and they actually do a really good breakdown and comparison between how you can link these up into the MITRE ATT&CK framework. I'll drop that in resources as well, but yeah, just keeping it simple. This is an example where you might have an APT or an attack group who tend to do things in certain locations. In this case, you've got a group like Silence Group that is using these files, which I hadn't come across until recently, which are CHM or compiled HTML files. And they're effectively, those are the Windows like very 90s help files that you can see on the screen there. And so they're sometimes used in spear phishing techniques where they're attached and you try and convince a person to open them up. And what that actually has is a malicious file that gives them their initial access, and then they can move from there. So in this case, if we knew there was potentially a malicious compiled HTML file on the system, we could actually use Prefetch against the program that opens these types of files, and that's HTML help or hh.exe. And then we can see just immediately from there what has been drawn on by that file by looking at Prefetch. So in that case, you see highlighted there the CHM file. And again, that gives you, even if that file itself has been deleted from the system, the Prefetch file is still there, and we can make them pay, or we can analyze it further. That's probably what we're going to do. Another example is provided by DFIR Spot, and that's looking at evidence. Say you found a suspicious PowerShell script, but you're not sure what it actually draws on or what it does. You can look at its Prefetch file, break that apart, and looking at the files that it's referenced, you can see it's actually gone and called on a bunch of binaries that immediately flag this as maybe being a bit of a suspicious script. So this is the not evil PowerShell script referred to there, but as well as a bunch of living off the land techniques or binaries that we can see there. So ipconfig next step up, and who am I? So you can see what it's potentially been doing in running that script, even if the script is no longer there. In this case, they actually went back and pulled apart the PowerShell script, and you can see in the script itself on the right, yes, that those were the binaries that script was calling. So again, it can just be a really good indicator of what techniques were used in a particular attack. So hopefully, as a result of doing this, you can start to get your timeline all in a row, like ducklings like to be all in a row. It's quite possible, though, that it's a bit more like this, and they're a bit more everywhere. And that's just the nature of investigations, but also the reason that we have to be very careful with our note-taking and our logging as we're going through these sorts of things, because evidence just can get everywhere very quickly. But that's another lesson entirely. Yeah, then we, though, get on to trying to contain them. So like ducks, Prefetch kind of leaves behind a lot of leavings or evidence, but it isn't without its ability to be contained or dealt with. So some things we need to keep in mind if we're going through and trying to look at Prefetch is that it might be enabled only on certain workstations. So it might not be all over the deck. It might just be not even on the server or the workstations you're looking at, because here's the other thing, it can be disabled sometimes by users or by attackers. So it's not necessarily going to be there. More concerning, though, is that if someone's sufficiently motivated, they can just clean that up. So a lot of the wiping programs do contain the ability to delete them, or they can manually delete them if they have the right level of access, or they can be modified or replaced. So they're not like write protected. You can get in there quite easily and start screwing around with them. There are still ways to recover the original traces of evidence, but I won't be talking about that today. So, other limitations. You requested this slide because I had additional time, but if you weren't aware, we're going to have it's the end of ComfyCon, so we're going to be learning some things. Yes, ducks are one of the few members, few types of bird, rather, forensics slip there. That's what I'll call that. One of the few types of birds that actually has quite a lengthy penis, or a penis at all. Lots of them don't even have one. And yes, it is corkscrew shaped. What you might not realize is that it's, yes, it's used during the mating season, but at the end of the mating season, it drops off. So it's potentially not there at all. Much like that, Prefetch files, they can get too large, and when they're not being used anymore, they might just drop off as well. In that case, we're talking about, so what I'm trying to say is there's a limited number of them that Windows will keep. And that number depends on the version of Windows you're dealing with. Earlier versions of Windows are around the 128 mark. I'm looking at my notes to just make sure I get that right. Or 1124. There is a newer version of Prefetch, which is Superfetch, and that's just over the 200 mark. So yeah, they once that you hit that upper limit, they will just be overridden. Now, I've also included this one because a few other presenters have talked about using AI to write their talks. Obviously, I did not. It's only come from me. But I did run it through a few just for fun and to see what they came up with. And I found it quite funny that ChatGPT, when told to draw comparisons between ducks and Prefetch, gave a bunch of efficiency and speed and whatever, very thematic type comparisons. But it also made the note, and I thought it was quite sweet, that both ducks and Prefetch are quite common. Nothing hugely special, don't get a lot of attention, but they are very important, and they have a very important part to play for the ecosystem and improving the environment in which they operate. So I thought that was quite sweet. I also thought it funny that Microsoft, when Microsoft's Copilot, when I asked it the same question, just refused to answer. So just try that one at home. I could be doing it wrong. I don't know. Anyway, so that's the end of my talk. I hope I have accurately depicted the beauty and usefulness of both ducks and Prefetch, and haven't blown things out of the water. We're really just trying to give you a sense of how these sort of investigations are conducted and how it can be potentially useful to consider, either if you're conducting a response yourself or involved in any capacity, or just for your curiosity. So I hope that was useful. That was me. I'm WeirdCon. I'm in the server. Feel free to hit me up with any questions. I'll have a quick look, or contact me via socials. That's everything. That's resources, like I promised.
Geese are better than ducks.
What? No
Geese
way.
are better than ducks.
No, is that going to be the speaker question this year?
I prefer a duck, to be honest.
Yeah.
Geese are
I mean, ducks
horrible.
taste better.
They do.
I am
Ducks are
biased because once I got chased up a playground slide as a child by a flock of geese, and so I managed to outsmart them by coming down the strat of it and sliding around. Yeah. Anyway, we have a long running feud going on.
You have is it every goose or is it just one goose?
Oh, it's every goose. Absolutely every goose. Really, you silly goose.
Oh, you. I didn't find that photo, but there is quite a fun photo of seeing WeirdCon in her natural habitat with 20 plastic ducks all around her.
Yeah.
Just
that was the CPF we ran at the end of last year, and I did say, particularly for teams that were struggling, if they brought me one of the rubber ducks, that I would give them a hint. And so I ended up with a hint.
So you ended up with a lot of rubber ducks.
Yeah, lots of rubber ducks. So yeah,
awesome. Thank you very much. There's been a lot of duck pictures posted. I think that was very appreciated, and maybe you have some new. There was even the duck tails came into it and things like that.
Well,
so you're
so Stephanie Beatrice is starring in DuckTales. Is that
apparently?
Yeah. So Stephanie and David Tennant and Jim Cummings obviously were all voice actors for various ducks in DuckTales and Darkwing Duck. Yeah.
All right.
And yes, we now have ducks. Yes. Thank you, backstage person.
Thank you so much.
I was more of an Aladdin person than a doctor. Anyway, we won't get into that.
Thank you very much. Mirage. Yeah.
Have fun.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.